The International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, has listed aspartame as possibly carcinogenic. So what is aspartame, what it is made of, and where do you find it? Aspartame is the most popular non-caloric sweetener. It makes around 75% of all sweeteners sales, and it's mainly found in beverages, in yogurts, cereals, and breath fresheners. And under high temperatures, aspartame becomes unstable. That's why you can't find it in baked goods. What does possibly carcinogenic, as the IARC has classified aspartame, what does possibly carcinogenic exactly means? So the International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, which is an arm of the WHO, has 5 different levels of substances, of substance classification. The first one is carcinogenic. Carcinogenic means substances that have convincing evidence that they cause cancer. One example of this would be smoking. A lot of us knows this already. Asbestos is also an example of a substance that causes lung cancer. The second substance classification is probably carcinogenic. So there's 2 things here, probably and possibly. Probably carcinogenic includes substances or situations with strong evidence that it can cause cancer in humans, but at present time there is no conclusive evidence that it can cause cancer. So there's some evidence, but it's not conclusive. Working overnight, for example, is a situation that is probably carcinogenic according to the IARC. Another example is eating red meat. The third substance classification is possibly carcinogenic. So this is where aspartame is. Possibly carcinogenic means substances with some evidence that it can cause cancer in humans, but at present it's far from conclusive. So in probably carcinogenic, the substance before, there was evidence, but it wasn't conclusive yet. And by possibly carcinogenic, there is some evidence, but it's far from conclusive. The fourth substance classification is unclassifiable. So unclassifiable means there's no evidence at present that this substance could cause cancer in humans. And the fifth substance classification is probably not carcinogenic to humans. Probably not carcinogenic to humans. So there's strong evidence that it does not cause cancer in humans. So let's go back to aspartame. Aspartame is classified as possibly carcinogenic. Now, if you remember, possibly was there's some evidence, but it's far from conclusive. And the decision was made based on reviewing around 1,300 publications, 1,300 studies. And one example for these studies was one from France, where they observed around 100,000 participants over 8 years. And they found an increased risk for cancer within people using artificial sweeteners, especially aspartame. So increased risk for cancer within the people using artificial sweeteners, especially aspartame. And this type of study is called a cohort population-based study. So this means that they observed a selected group of population for a certain period of time to see whether there are high numbers of diseases within the exposed group in comparison to the non-exposed group. And in this example, they had two groups. One group was using more artificial sweeteners in higher amounts, and the other group was using no artificial sweeteners to very low amounts. And this kind of studies has certain limitations. One of the main limitations is that certain risk factors could be overrepresented in the study, which makes it very hard to generalize our findings in such type of studies. To understand this better, let's imagine that you want to do a study about the influence of smoking on lung cancer. So you're planning to do a study, you want to see whether smoking really causes lung cancer or not. And to look for participants, you go to a lung clinic. And in the lung clinic, of course, you will have a high number of lung diseases, especially lung cancer, and you'll have a lot of people with a history of smoking. So collecting your data from the lung clinic will make your data unrepresentative, because in the lung clinic there are a lot more people with a history of smoking than outside the clinic, than in the general population. And this does not reflect the behavior of the population that you are studying. So it will make it difficult for you to generalize your findings in this study, in this data you collected, because the risk factors are overrepresented. In this example, the risk factor is smoking, and smoking is overrepresented in this lung clinic than in the general population. Other products that are also classified as possibly carcinogenic are certain types of human papillomaviruses, nickel, radio frequency electromagnetic fields, which is, in other words, carrying your phone very close to your body, and in this example also aspartame. So the big question here is, should you avoid aspartame? And the answer is, if you can avoid aspartame, you definitely should. But it is very hard to avoid aspartame, especially when I said before it makes around 75% of all artificial sweetener sales. So it's widely represented in a lot of products, especially if you take food supplements, for example, protein powder. I think actually it's quite hard to go 1 month without eating anything without aspartame, because it's in a lot of products. But I think you should definitely try to avoid aspartame for another reason, not just because it might cause eventually cancer, but there's another reason, and this reason is that artificial sweeteners in general, and also aspartame, they can change your gut microbiome, and they change it in a way that your gut starts to absorb more glucose from the food you consume, compared to people who don't take artificial sweeteners at all, compared to the condition where you haven't taken any artificial sweeteners before. And there was a study from 2014 that showed that people taking artificial sweeteners had higher blood glucose levels than the ones who haven't been taking any artificial sweeteners. And having high blood glucose levels will increase your diabetes risk. So I think it's definitely a good way of living to avoid aspartame and to avoid artificial sweeteners where you can.